In generations 1 and 2, there was not enough space on the cartridges for every Pokemon to get its own unique sprite in the party, or in the overworld for that matter. Game Freak's quick fix solution in Generation 1 was to make 10 sprites, and dump all of the Pokemon into one of those 10 categories that they would then be represented in the party by. I think this is a fine solution. It works well enough in the context of the limited hardware capacity of those generations, but it does raise some questions for me about the decisions that they made. Are they correlated at all to type? Why is Growlithe a cow? Which Pokemon got bespoke sprites in Generation 2, where the storage capacity was a bit better? All this and more will be answered, or at least confusingly explored. A quick note that this is not a criticism video where I suggest that they really should have done something super different from what they did. I really like the party sprites. They're a fun little alternative to the actual artwork that look good and work well for what they're meant to do. It's really hard to argue with all of the bird Pokemon being categorized into the bird-looking sprite category. There are some fringe cases that I will discuss a bit later, but on the whole, I think these are good sprites that work well enough in context. I think moving to the Generation 3 system of unique sprites was absolutely the correct move, but still, Generations 1 and 2 did okay with what they had. Broadly speaking, there are 10 Generation 1 party sprites that are categorized as Rhydon, Pokeball, Fossil, Doll, Bird, Surf Creature, Bug, Plant, Serpent, and Cow. These are the regular party sprites that all Pokemon appear as in red and blue. The labels I have just listed are not official labels in most cases, but I think they're descriptive enough to understand what I am talking about. In yellow, Pikachu and Raichu got their own party sprite, and a select few Pokemon also have overworld sprites that are used in other areas. Bulbasaur, Sandshrew and Oddish in Cerulean City, Chansey in the Pokemon Centers, Clefairy in Vermilion City, Snorlax on Routes 12 and 16, and Jigglypuff in Pewter City and on the SS Anne. Despite being bespoke sprites for specific Pokemon, these sprites are not used for these Pokemon when you have them in your party, despite already existing in the game data. It may be a case of not wanting to animate them specifically or some other data reason, knowing how broken these games are, but it does seem a little bit odd. It's even more odd when you consider how reused most sprites are in different contexts. The Pokeball sprite is exactly the same as the item ball that exists in the overworld. The Rhydon sprite represents a whopping 59 Pokemon, well over a third of all Pokemon in Generation 1. The Doll sprite is used for, well, dolls in the overworld, and the Fossil is placed on the ground in Mount Moon. The Fossil makes me laugh a bit, since it kind of implies that the Pokemon hasn't changed at all as a result of being revived, and that it's simply reanimated by the machine on Cinnabar Island. One thing I will also point out, they did not categorize by evolution here. There are instances of Pokemon that evolve into another and subsequently their party sprite changes. Slowpoke and Slowbro are in different categories, and so are Rhyhorn and Rhydon. I like this because it does imply that someone went through and categorized with a finer tooth comb than just putting each line into the same category. Let's talk about some of the line calls where I'm not really sure that they have the Pokemon in the right category. The original example that made me want to look into this is Growlithe, which is placed in the cow category. Maybe it was a data limitation thing, since there's no obvious quadrupedal, furry, mammal or rodent category, but I think there probably should have been. The only reason I really noticed this is because I opened the party menu one day in Generation 1 with a Growlithe in my party, and did a double take upon seeing that it was a cow. If Growlithe is a cow, what other questionable categorizations did they make? Thankfully, there's not too many that are super questionable. I think that you could easily expand the Pokeball category to include some other Pokemon, as in the games it only includes Voltorb, Electrode, Magnemite, and Magneton. But wouldn't Geodude's line be a better fit here than in the Rhydon category? Might Ghastly, Coughing, and Poliwag also be suitable for this circular group of friends? While we're at it, wouldn't Ditto be a better fit for the slightly amorphous Serpentine category than the Rhydon group? Why are Zubat and Golbat not in the Birds category? How on earth is Zubat more akin to a Rhydon than, say, Pidgey? Some of these categorizations are probably not what I would pick, but it's also incredibly low stakes. They're just low pixel count representations of Pokemon, waiting to be sent out into battle where they can be their detailed selves. Also, why did they not use Snorlax's Overworld sprite in the party? With Generation 2 came cartridges with a touch more space, and they used some of that for more party sprites. Notably, all Pokemon are not crammed into 10 categories, and while there are still some generic ones, many Pokemon also have bespoke party sprites that are used for only that species. The Staryu line is a great example. No other Pokemon looks like a starfish, so it's just Staryu and Starmie who use this party sprite. I think it's also kind of cool that Unknown got its own party sprite, given how unique the species is. It got a slightly cooler expansion in Generation 3 where the party sprites of Unknown display their unique lettering, rather than the generic one that they get in Generation 2. What's also good is the overworld sprites of Pokemon that have them now match their party sprites. There's no more Bulbasaur appearing differently in the overworld than it does in the party. This makes much more sense, especially for Pokemon like Gyarados. You already made the overworld sprite, why force that Pokemon into a less fitting group in the party? The Kanto starters also get their own unique party sprites, for marketing purposes presumably. The one exception to the party sprite overworld sprite parity is Snorlax, which is now much bigger in the overworld. I think it looks really cool in the overworld, so I'm fine with that. Generation 2 also solved many of my criticisms from the awkward categorization of some Generation 1 Pokemon. In Generation 2, there is a dog, rodent, mammal category that includes Pokemon like Growlithe. The cow category is still there, and now just contains bovine and equine Pokemon, which is great. They added my favourite of the group sprites, the Blob, which appropriately includes Ditto, but also Grimer and Muck, and the new Pokemon Slugma and Macargo. I don't really agree with placing Coughing and Wheezing here. I think they're still a better fit for the Orb category, but it's not that egregious an inclusion. Speaking of the Orb category, it now has a face. The Ghost category is basically just a Gengar sprite anyway, and appropriately has the Gengar line, Misdreavus, and then the comically out of place Wobbuffet, which I actually really like. It feels like a subtle nod to Wobbuffet in the anime, which is always popping out at unexpected times. Diglett and Dugtrio's sprite is also really funny to me, since it looks like it's shaking its head at something, like, "No, please do not send me into battle, return me to the ground where you got me from." The Generation 2 sprites fixed a lot of the problems caused by the limited space in Generation 1, which is great, another win for Generation 2. It's not perfect. Seadra and Horsey are in the generic fish category, when they probably make more sense in the serpent or dragon category, and Aipom, Wooper, and Teddiursa probably fit better in the Clefairy group than the Rhydon one, but overall it's a good balance. The fun thing about the sprites in Generation 2 is that aside from the bespoke ones, they almost resemble type categories. Take the dragons for example. The dragon-like sprite is just used for Charizard, Kingdra, and the Dragonite line. Yes, Charizard isn't technically a dragon, but Growlithe's not a cow either, so we can put that aside for a moment. Likewise, the fish category only contains actual water types. The way I think about it is not whether all of one type are in a specific sprite category, but all of one category are one type. This nicely accounts for Pokemon species that have bespoke party sprites, but also means if you're looking at a full party of Pokemon all with nicknames, You can make relatively educated guesses at what types they might be without checking stats. It's not necessarily useful for anything, but for kids learning to play the games, it's kind of a nice shorthand method. You see the fish, you need a water type, you click fish. The party sprites in Generations 1 and 2 work well enough as a representation of the Pokemon in your party. As I noted, there are some questionable groupings here, particularly in Generation 1, but overall most of the allocations make sense. And much like the actual sprites in Generation 1, they have a certain character to them that gives them a kind of charm when compared to the newer games. The Generation 1 sprites are quirky and a bit weird and are often drawn from unconventional perspectives, to the point where if you showed Generation 1 sprites to someone for the first time who was familiar with, say, Generation 4 onwards, they probably wouldn't believe you that they're official artwork. To me, the party sprites have the same character and charm, just on a smaller level. That's all I had, folks. Tell me, did you ever get a surprise when you opened your party and saw the sprite next to the name of the Pokemon you just caught? Do you have a favourite party sprite from Generation 1 or 2? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, it helps the channel out a bunch. Give me a follow on Twitch if you want to chat between videos and catch a speedrun. Thanks for watching.